Hello, my name is Jennifer Shlomovich, and I am a vegan confidence coach. I specialize in helping vegans eliminate people-pleasing so they can confidently be themselves and navigate the challenges of having a lifestyle different from the people around them. Here on my channel, The Confident Vegan, I share a variety of supportive resources, including inspiring interviews and recipe videos. Today, I am pivoting from the topic of veganism to have a powerful discussion about emotional intelligence with my special guest, Kevin Hunttinh from 2 Steps Forward Coaching. Emotional intelligence is an important skill to master in life, both personally and professionally. Kevin is on a mission to elevate emotional intelligence among leaders. In a world that's faster and more complex than ever, he believes in the power of leading with confidence and kindness. Through personalized coaching sessions, workshops, speaking engagements, and more, Kevin empowers leaders to not just meet their goals, but to surpass them, fostering environments where creativity, empathy, and resilience flourish. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you here. I'm really excited to have you here. Once in a while, I have non-vegan guests to talk about really important topics, and emotional intelligence is super important, whether in all areas of your life, both personally, professionally. I felt like this would be a great topic for my audience because as vegans, we're navigating a lifestyle different from everyone else, and that can be challenging sometimes, especially if you're living with non-vegans or you're in social settings. And so I thought this would be beneficial for my community to hear you talk about this subject, as well as just all the other things that are going on in the world. I think emotional intelligence is like the core of just overall well-being in our lives. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thanks. I can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, great. So before we jump into what emotional intelligence is, what inspired you to do the work that you do?
It's really three factors that, extended into started in my childhood. But one was, of course, recognizing in my adulthood that emotions were things that I was experiencing when I was younger. Yet in my family dynamics, we didn't really talk about it. It wasn't something where people were so coming forward and asking like, hey, how are you feeling? Or even trying to make sense of what you're feeling. And so I'd say that that's like the first point of entry for me and why this topic is so critical. And the two other ones that come to mind are, being having a career where I've worked in large corporate settings, where there's a lot of team dynamics, where there's a lot of collaboration, even the idea of, again, we're emotional beings. Being in that space, it wasn't talked about either. Growing or throughout my entire professional career, I don't remember any leader really ever discussing how our emotions can help fuel our performance and help us become better leaders at all. Like it wasn't something that was really discussed. And then I think the third piece is, I'd say in relationships, just in our relationships in general. Like I'm married, but so again, sometimes how do you make sense of your emotions and even the emotions of your spouse or partner to be able to help you better understand what's going on, and more importantly, how you really want to show up in your relationship and be the person that you want to be, right? To that person that you love. And so I'd say like all of those dynamics, like you said, it covers really all aspects of our lives, but those three areas for me are what have fueled not only my curiosity, but my focus on how important our emotions are.
Yeah, those are very important things. And I can relate a lot with family. Like, it's kind of like ignoring the elephant in the room, not discussing certain things, just kind of carrying on like, everything's okay. We're not going to talk about it and keep going.
Exactly, which in a way, right, when you say it out loud, you think to yourself, that's kind of strange, right? Like it's kind of strange to think that you just would overlook what someone's feeling. Now, we've certainly been in situations where, let's say, a close friend of ours is in need and maybe upset. And of course, we respond hopefully in a way that is supportive and with empathy and kindness. But even then, that can create, I think, a lot of awkward moments for people, especially when they also weren't exposed to like the idea of understanding that their emotions are actually signals and that we should be listening to those and paying close attention. So it's funny how emotions for some people I think are can make them really uncomfortable. It can be a very uncomfortable, unsettling space.
It really can. As someone who was a recovering people pleaser and was in a my first marriage was an unhealthy situation, and looking back and realizing, my mindset, ignoring red flags and just always, sacrificing my own feelings and ignoring them and
Mhm.
all of that. Our feelings, our emotions do tell us something. And like one of my favorite things to that I tell people is our triggers are our teachers. And uh, you mentioned about, being married, and when you're in a partnership like that, um, it's very helpful. Like you can be in a healthy relationship and your partner can accidentally trigger you.
Mhm.
And when we get triggered, we feel like, oh my God, this is they're doing whatever to us, when it's you have to like what emotional intelligence has helped me do is, okay, here's my trigger, I'm going to acknowledge it here. What is this telling me? And then once you process those emotions, then you can communicate, and then sometimes you can find out it's a misunderstanding, right? So
Uh,
what's obvious to us, what's obvious to one person isn't necessarily obvious to the other person, because we all have our own lens, we all have our own experiences, and so what it means to one person, it can mean something completely different, which is so important. Like as we were talking about, having those skills uh, in relationships, but also in work culture. Having a misunderstanding at work, if understanding emotional intelligence and applying those skills can really help navigate a situation that could be a real big blowout, or or something that
it's
goes wrong.
Right. I feel like a lot of those moments are the moments where it's after the fact. For most people, it might be after the fact when you're starting to reflect on what just happened that you recognize that you're like, whoops, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Or you kind of get caught up in even assessing what just happened. And sometimes again, if you're not like well prepared in terms of understanding emotions, it's hard to make sense of it. But what you do know is you're like, wow, I probably could have handled that maybe in a better way. Or, and you're right, I think the piece that you nailed is just this idea that it really is our own internal dialogue that typically is fueling what we're feeling and what we're experiencing, which is, I think, such an interesting concept because I love when I work with people and they say, this is one of my favorite lines is, well, so and so made me feel this way. And I'm like, but they really didn't make you feel that way. What you're really saying is that yes, they said something, you interpreted it, or you internally you have taken that information to a certain way or a certain space internally that has now brought up these emotions for you, which is really you doing that. Like we do it to ourselves, meaning if we start to understand it, we can actually start to maybe redirect it or understand that, wow, there might be another perspective here that I'm not considering that would help me in this moment and not get angry or frustrated or disengage, because a lot of times that's what can happen is it's through those emotional experiences that we tend to pull back, or we don't actually put ourselves and insert ourselves in a way that we think is going to be beneficial because we don't even know what that looks like. We don't know how to make sense of it. But I love when people say that, like, you made me feel this way. And I'm like, well, did they really, who really made you feel what you felt? And it starts with us.
I love how you share that example, because we've all felt that way at one point in our lives. So and so made me feel this way, and then when I went through my coach training, that made me realize, oh, like I learned all these things about myself and my internal dialogue, and there's a lot of noise and nonsense that goes on behind the scenes that we don't even realize is like running the show half the time. And then yeah, if someone did something, it made us feel a certain way, but the internal stuff is really what's behind what made us feel that way. And then we have a choice to either react or respond, which I feel like is something the whole world needs to learn how to do these days, is to learn how to respond and not be so reactive. And I feel like social media has definitely uh, fueled all of that and made it more challenging, for sure, which is a whole other topic in itself. But yeah, we'll be talking about emotional intelligence, and it's a word that gets thrown around a lot. But could you share a little bit more in depth what actually is emotional intelligence?
Mean, at its essence, it really emotional intelligence is the idea of not only first building the awareness and the understanding of our emotions, meaning just paying close attention to the idea of what am I feeling. It starts there, but it's through that discourse and understanding just what am I feeling that you can then start to build on it, which is also the idea of having control and understanding as a function of making sense of what you're feeling. And so it is a practice. I would say that as much as, we talk about EQ, if you really want to grow your emotional intelligence, it is a mindfulness practice of understanding again what you're feeling so that you can then start to make sense of what does it mean for me, and then what is it that I really want it to mean? Like to start to be able to be in control of more of, like you were saying, responding versus reacting, which you're right. In most situations, people I think are reacting in their day to day, and we see it everywhere. And we see this playing out, I think, almost everywhere in our day to
Mm-hmm.
day lives, and just even in what's unfolding across the world. And so it that I think the idea of practicing mindfulness is where maybe many people get tripped up too, is that it takes it takes effort. It takes real effort on our part. Yet the benefits have been shown to be, I'm telling you, like out of this world, like meaning you make more money if you have a higher IQ. EQ is a bigger contributor to overall success than IQ. There's so many other factors that EQ really can contribute to our lives, meaning our own sense of satisfaction becomes
Mm-hmm.
higher. And I don't think you can really put a value on that. I mean, to be able to have less stress or worry or anxiety in your life, I think is something that most people would say, yeah, like sign me up. I'm tired of feeling overwhelmed, or, again, these emotions that we experience. And that's really the path, is to just start by understanding what our emotions are. Like, what am I even feeling is a great place to start.
Yeah, it's a very powerful place to start. An analogy I use with clients sometimes is it's like, in The Wizard of Oz, in the scene where Toto pulls the curtain and you realize the big scary monster is really this old man behind a curtain, right? Trying,
Totally.
and that is like what's going on in our subconscious. We're feeling something, it comes out as this big scary monster. We don't realize when we pull the curtain back that it's actually something else, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, and when you have that awareness, and yes, it can be extremely uncomfortable when I've done a lot of this personal development work on myself. And that's why I'm so passionate about helping others with the work that I'm doing, is you realize how powerful this stuff is when you start unpacking your emotions. And yeah, it's really uncomfortable and it can be really messy, but that's what coaches are there for. That's what therapists are there for. There's all kinds of support out there that you don't have to go through it alone.
Hmm.
And getting through that discomfort, that's where a lot of amazing things are. And just giving yourself that space to feel it and heal it. Um it's made a big difference in my life, and just anxiety and dealing with stress, because stress is always going to be there.
Hmm.
It's how we react to it. And now I know, like, I used to keep going and going and going and doing things until I fell apart, burned out, and needed a couple of days to recover and not be able to really do much of anything. And because I have a high threshold for stress, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. So, um, learning that it's being able to read my emotions, like knowing those early signs of, oh, I'm starting to feel those little rumblings of burnout. Now I can do what I need to do to plan and take care of myself. I think a lot of us, before we're aware of things ourselves and everything externally, before we have this type of awareness, we're kind of running on autopilot, and we don't realize just how, we can be more intentional once we have that awareness, and make a big difference in our lives and just what we create for ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the beauty of all of this, is that what what you really want or you desire is totally possible. It has to start with some fundamental like awareness about what's happening even right now. Like, what do I
Mm-hmm.
tend to do? What tends to trigger me? Usually there are patterns that you also can see in terms of the ways in which you might get triggered emotionally when someone either says or does something. And those are those really important cues that for anyone can start that process of understanding, like, well, what are the thoughts that created even what I was feeling? That would be like the next level, apart from understanding what you are feeling, is to really start to unpack, like you're saying, well, what was I thinking? What was I thinking that actually resulted in what I was feeling? And that to me is, like you said, the connection between the two, and understanding that it's typically our thoughts that are always driving it. And we're not sometimes aware of that. Like, we're just not even, we're like in autopilot. So we just think like, oh, that's just the way it is, when actually it isn't. We all have the ability to be able to give that more intention and more purpose if we so choose. The idea is also we have a choice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Triggers, like I have a process for myself and that I share with my clients, is just I'm a big journaler. Journalers have helped me. Journaling has helped me a lot. And there's some journal prompts that have helped me navigate triggers. Like if I'm feeling triggered about something, or from a friend or my husband, or like some type of something's triggering me, I'll excuse myself and I'll spend some time with my journal, and I'll ask myself, why am I upset? Well, that's the first question. Why am I upset? And when have I felt like this before? Like to like pinpoint,
Mhm.
a just to kind of create that awareness. And then when you start uncovering it, you realize sometimes it's from, you go back enough, it could be from some crazy little thing that happened when you're 10 years old, that then another thing as an adult represented something else. And then you realize this whole thing, but just those asking yourself those simple questions, and then communicating, then how do I want to handle this, right? Because then you start thinking, do I want to, like, scream and yell at the person, like that moment when I'm charged? Or when you ask yourself, how do I really want to handle this, like, that's that
Mhm.
opportunity to then respond, and instead of react. And I feel like tactful communication is a big part of the work that I do with my clients, in terms of, not being people pleasers and setting boundaries. And this type of work, I feel like, is very key and fundamental for boundary setting and communication. And so what are some tips that you can share about tactful communication and emotional intelligence?
I mean, I think for me, it's always, again, you have to build the awareness first, but I feel like that one of the biggest things that you can do for yourself is to always be asking yourself, again, who do I want to be in this situation, for example? Or again, first understanding, who do I tend to be under those conditions
Mm,
when you're just sort of reacting, and understanding that there is a choice. Actually, there is a choice. And once you start to tap into who would I want to be and who do I want to be right now, given that I know that this is unfolding, like whatever it is and whatever you're feeling, you can start to, I think, create or redirect in a way the way that you normally might respond or react, and actually show up in a different way. And it takes, again, practice, which I think that's the beauty of it, is if you knew you could improve your relationship with someone that you truly cared about, whether it's a coworker, let's say it is a spouse or partner, it doesn't matter. The bigger gain here is really for yourself, in that you get to show up in a way that you want to, and that also in your mind you can say, what would be helpful in this situation, right? Which in a way gets you thinking differently. Like we don't ask ourselves that, I think, typically ever. At least I know most people I encounter day to day, they're not stopping to even ask themselves these types of questions. But if you
Hmm.
just ask yourself that, you can start to show up differently, or like you said, respond versus react, that idea that we were talking about earlier. And so I feel like those to me are two simple ways. And sometimes that might mean in the moment stepping away, recognizing that you're like, okay, I know that I'm really angry in this moment. Like I can feel it. I'm in touch with that emotion, but maybe even just say like, hey, I just need a couple of minutes. Could we regroup like, in X amount of time? Or
Hmm.
not always having to feel that you have to address things in the moment, especially when your emotions are right at the surface. So from my mind, those are just some really simple ways to start to pay closer attention to it, but also to help you show up in maybe a different way that you know is going to be better for you and better for the other person. But really, the benefit is the outcome that you're going to experience is where that's where the magic starts to unfold. And you see that you're like, oh, wow, like this might be bringing me closer together with this person. And that's exactly what I do want. Or this is actually helping build a more trusting, collaborative relationship. And that is what I want with this person. So you start to again sort of change what would have been like your old behavior and start to put plans in place of like what would it look like if it were different? Like if I were really focused on creating a trusting relationship, what would I be saying or doing?
I love that question of what would it look like if it were different. I feel like that's such a powerful question. People don't pause and think about that because we have these patterns that are so embedded in us. And part of it too is, beliefs and values get challenged and we feel like our values are right and what we believe is right. And sometimes I think there's this misconception that if you give space to hear and understand someone else, you're agreeing to something you don't agree with, where you're just listening to somebody else and you can agree to disagree. And and finding that middle space of, okay, these are, and I think too, being clear of what it is that you believe and what your values are. um I wasn't aware of just how important understanding our values were until about 8 years ago when I started going for, training for coaching. And I it was a game changer because that's where a lot of triggers happen. It's like with friends, challenges with friendships, and that's people can grow apart because your values can change, your interests can change, things can change and evolve. And and also, tying that in with the topic of judgment,
Mm,
where, judgment can be a very challenging thing. As a recovering people pleaser, that's a huge thing for me that I had to get over. It held me back from being vegan because I was afraid of how people would judge me for being different. And
totally.
eventually I realized, oh, I survived it. I survived the crazy the occasional comments here and there. And but when you get clear on who you are and what you're about and what your identity is, sometimes we're not even sure what our identity is. We take on the identities of our families, and that doesn't necessarily resonate with us either, but we're not sure who we are. Right? So then we're in like this weird in between space that can be really, really uncomfortable. And so what are some ways that we can separate ourselves from the judgments of others?
Mean, that's I think a really interesting question because I feel like you're right. A lot of even I'm thinking about myself personally, where I was an overachiever. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
something where I recognized that a pattern that I was always in was thinking that my worth was about like, what I did, like my results, my achievements, like what I was able to accomplish. And there was a lot of stress in that, a lot of stress and
Yeah.
anxiety because of the pressure that I put on myself. And funny, at the end of it, it was also the way that I was judging myself as a result of it. When it didn't seem to pan out in the way that I didn't get that validation or that recognition from like the other party. I remember that for me, it really hit me on a very deeply personal level in terms of my own judgment towards myself. And I think that that is where for most of us also it's playing out, is that we're so heavily into not understanding when we are judging ourselves, and that just because we either did whatever the reasons are that we're doing it, that it's okay whatever the outcome is going to be, because typically we're always, I think, doing the best that we possibly can. But I think that the one question that has been helpful to me in terms of trying to dissect what's going on, and especially when it comes to my own thoughts and that internal dialogue, is asking myself, what evidence do I have to sort of
Mm.
support the story that I'm telling myself? And what that helps me do is unravel all of that crap, not crap, but the stuff that I grew up with, right? That I somehow believed was who I am or made me who I am, versus, you know what, this really, there is no evidence here to actually support that type of thinking. And so that has helped me tremendously. And I still use it. I use it in my day to day. So like if I'm in a situation where I might be judging myself or starting to go to a place where I'm either beating myself up internally or even maybe blaming other people, I try to stop and say, well, wait, what evidence do I have that supports what I am telling myself? And if there's really no evidence there, then I can start to, it creates the space for me to be able to, again, have less judgment and say like, well, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with you. Or this has, right, this has nothing absolutely to do with me. Why am I making it about me? And then that creates that distance, right? That distance of, well, wait, if it's not about me, now what do I want to do? Like, what would be helpful? Again, that whole, it's amazing how it seems simple, but just it takes time and practice to really start to use these types of tools, especially questions. And like I think you mentioned, getting really curious just about why, like why do I tend to feel this way? Why do I consistently feel this way when someone does this to me? And when you start to break it apart, that's where all of the, that the freedom, finding more freedom comes, and the less judgment, like it starts to disappear.
I love that question about evidence because and also what you shared about self-judgment, right? We can be our own worst enemies, we can be our worst critics, and then we project that onto other people, right? This person did this. This means that they're doing blank, or this is how they feel about me. When really that's our own self-imposed judgment.
Totally.
And I feel like that's such a powerful question because then it's well when you can pick that apart and then you realize okay this person's doing something I'm feeling this way but are they actually giving me evidence that that's how they feel and that's where I feel like that's when a conversation is so important and there's a topic that I wanted to talk about that I was trying to find a way to weave this in is the topic of ghosting, right?
Mhm.
Where like I've been ghosted by people and we've all been there either on both sides of it, right, at some point. And when that's happened to me, I have filled in all kinds of
Oh,
crappy reasons how horrible and unworthy I am.
it's it's like the people lose sleep over this. Like, I mean, seriously,
Yes.
like people, it affects people in a deep way. Like they are losing sleep. They're up all night thinking about it. They might be spending hours internally, like you said, with this internal dialogue of what did I do or what didn't I do? Or and no one has actually even said nothing has been said. Like
Right.
you get ghosted, right? And you don't even have any information. All you know is that the person didn't show up, right? Like if you really remained as objective as you could, that's all that's really has happened, is that the person did not show up.
Right.
That's
Or did
it.
not
And
respond. Right. Or they
but
didn't respond or they used to reply back and now they're not.
end of
And
story. And but
right.
then we pick that up and we're like, oh yeah, this is a perfect. I can't wait to like beat myself up, like put on my own boxing gloves and start boxing with myself, where you're like, what did I do? Did I say something wrong? Did I not? Oh my gosh, maybe because I didn't do X, that's why we will create, I mean, we create so much stuff that it's like but nothing really, nothing like nothing happened. It's just that the person did not literally show up. And
Right.
not to say that that I think becomes a bigger question of values too, like our own personal values.
Right.
If you're engaging with individuals where that's consistently a part of their behavior and they're not ever providing any insight as to why they either didn't show up or ghosted you or whatever, that then it becomes more of again a personal decision of, well, wait a minute, like, do I really want this type of a person in my life, or is it the type of relationship that I really want to be in? If this is indicative of their behavior, actually it's really insightful information that you can then use to your advantage, right? The idea of, well, honestly, you know what? I want to be surrounded by people who are going to show up for themselves, who are going to, when they say they're going to be there, they're going to be there. And if they're not, they're going to let me know, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of ghosting is probably, it'd be amazing to see like the stories like as a movie, like the thoughts that we have and how again all the stuff that we create, all this craziness that we create that isn't, again, it isn't helping us. It's actually creating more stress or creating more worry or anxiety, like a lot of all these emotions. But yeah, I mean, I would say that's one thing where if you start to practice, I have gotten so, I would say like really proud that I can literally in those moments just be like, here's another example. You're an entrepreneur like ourselves. You have a potentially a new client or a new organization that you might be working with. You've had a great conversation. The outcome was, I'm going to send you a proposal or whatever, and then there's silence, right? There's you don't hear anything for, let's say, 24, 48 hours, and then the story starts, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't like me. I maybe my proposal, it was off. Maybe I included the wrong information, or I should not have included it's too much. It's way too, it's overpriced. What we start, right? We start telling ourselves a same example. Like, I think this is such a solid example. We start to make up so much stuff when there is literally no evidence at all, other than the person has not replied yet.
Yeah, I love how simply you just put it. Right, the person has not replied, and so what I've done, because it used to really derail me. Now I'll still have the chatter, but it doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have like it's just kind
Mm,
of like a little sting. It's kind of like a mosquito bite. And what I'll do is, if whether it's a friend or a potential client or somebody, I always will do like after I'll wait a while and then I'll do a follow up. And I'll just do, hey, just checking in. I haven't heard from you. Is everything okay? Would you like to talk? Like I will, because again, communication I feel like is the key for a lot of things. And so
mhm.
if I'm on the side of the ghosting, I'll wait a chunk of time that could, because again, maybe life happened, maybe they had a crazy couple of weeks, and then maybe you do hear from them, right? You don't know. But what feels like a right amount of time for me that's lengthy, then I'll just do like one check in. And if I don't hear from them, then that's okay. And if I do hear from them, great. But it's how I stand in my power of, you know what? Let me just create that opening of communication. And then wherever, and that's how I give myself closure on it, is
Gotcha.
because I feel like we need closure, and if we don't have control over when someone else replies to us.
Mm-mm.
So my way of taking control of the situation is, all right, you know what? I'm going to give it one more. And if it does, and then if not, I'm just going to, it wasn't meant to be, whatever it is, friendship, whatever. And then in terms of those who do the ghosting, a lot of that stems from just fear of an awkward conversation, not wanting to hurt someone's feelings, but then you end up hurting the person even more because you're abandoning them, right? It can trigger that abandonment wound that a lot of us have in some capacity, and certainly I did anyway. It can trigger that up, and it's like, oh my God, this is happening. And so having that experience has helped me be more empathetic, that emotional intelligence of, you know what, I don't like when someone ghosts me. So I try to figure out a way, how can I have this delicate conversation? If it's a friendship that I value, then it's like, hey, you know what? There's just something on my mind. I'd like to talk about it. And always, making sure I'm not in a triggered place when I have that conversation, and then being clear of what I want the outcome of at the end of that conversation. So this way, when I go in, I know what to focus on and what it is that I'm looking for. Sometimes people don't realize they're doing something that's upsetting. Maybe it's just a boundary that needs to be placed, or
Mm-hmm.
communication, and or maybe, a friendship that used to be close is no longer close, but just having a conversation around that, because I feel like you're also, even if it's something that's going to hurt the other person, if your intention is, I need to let this person know, it's either ghosting or sharing. It's either abandoning them completely and not telling them anything and letting them fill in the blanks, or you just saying, hey, it could be a learning and growth moment for them.
Totally.
But and so that's what I've tried to do, as through my work of emotional intelligence on myself, is, you know what, there's an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had. I can either avoid it and just ignore the person, which doesn't really do anyone any good, because then
Mm-mm.
I'm going to feel bad about it, and I know they're probably feeling bad about it, where it's just so much better to communicate it. And listen, if you don't want to be around someone anymore for various reasons, that's okay too. But just having that conversation can help. I feel like there's more value in the uncomfortable conversations than there is in just ignoring it and running away. I don't know. That's my thought on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in summary too, it's sort of like it's a learning opportunity, which if you look at it that way too, there's less pressure. It's more of I'm also learning in this process versus thinking that oh my God, how am I going to do it? Am I going to do it like right? Is it, am I going to be, what is the other person going to actually do or think or say? Instead of getting so wrapped up in all of these hypotheticals, it's, being very clear about like with yourself about, well, wait a minute, like, what do I want to communicate? What might be the benefits of me doing this for myself, but not only for myself, but also for the other person. Sort of, again, coming from a different place or an approach. And you also make me think that one of the things I work on a lot, especially in the professional realm, is when, people are talking about career management, is the idea of asking yourself, what do you want to feel as a result of, let's say, assuming a new job role or
Mm-hmm.
getting the promotion into whatever that new role might be? Because we are such a culture that gets, I think, so wrapped up in all of, what's the salary? What are the benefits? What are all these additional things that I'm going to be receiving? But a lot of times what we don't or we fail to understand is, but what am I going to be feeling as a result of what I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to be doing? And that is where I think that's where, like you said, the idea of burnout and everything exists, is that we don't sometimes take that into consideration. And then we find ourselves in a sticky situation where we're like, wait a minute, there's no amount of money that I would even want to get paid. I'm miserable. Like I don't
Yeah.
what and so it can fuel, if when not taken into consideration, it may again be something that it's after the fact that's when it starts to surface and we're like, well, wow, like this is what I'm experiencing and feeling as a result. And actually, even then, I would say we still have the notion of being empowered to change that if we want to. But
Mm-hmm.
again, you have to kind of step into it, and a lot of it is growth. It's just the idea of growing.
I love what you said about thinking about like how the culture is going to make someone feel in a work environment, because you're right, everyone's so caught up in the benefits, and people go job hopping, right? It's like, oh, I'm not happy here, and then they take
Totally.
on, and it kind of ties in with other things in life in general, whether it's, if you attract a certain kind of relationship or a certain type of job or just certain type of situations. Yes, there's certain things that are out of our control, but what is it that, because sometimes we're comfortable with the things that make us uncomfortable. Like we don't realize there's something we're getting from that, right? We're so
Hmm.
conditioned to accept a certain thing that we feel like that's normal. We don't realize that, oh, what I'm accepting is causing the issue. Or, when we change the way we think and do things, that's how we're going to create the change in our lives around us. If we keep doing the same things over and over again, then we're going to get the same results. So we're going to attract the same people. We're going to attract the same jobs. We're going to attract the same whatever. And so when you change your thought process around these things, then it's empowering because you mentioned before having a choice. We have a choice,
Mhm.
and I think many of us growing up didn't realize we had a choice to we just had to do what we were told, right? Most of the time.
Mhm.
And now here we are adults. We actually have a choice. We don't have to be slaves to some kind of lifestyle that we're not comfortable with or happy with. And so it's really important to have all of that awareness for sure.
Totally.
Well, this has been a really great conversation. I'm so glad that you joined me. Before we wrap up, what are some helpful resources you would like to recommend to viewers? Are there any TED Talks or podcasts or books or anything?
There's, you know what? I would say, funny, I read a lot. Now you're making me think. I'm reading a book right now that I just recommended someone, which is a little bit about EQ, but it's also about how our minds change. And it's called How Minds Change by David McRaney.
Oh,
And
okay.
then there is another one from, oh God, you're making me, I finished this some time ago, but there's a book by, I think his name is Mark Brackett, and he is head of, I think, he is head of the Emotional Intelligence Center at Yale, which is interesting, at Yale University. And his book on permission to feel, I think, is one of the most powerful books out there. It's especially for anyone who, again, doesn't sort of wants to make sense and better understand like why we have such a challenging time growing up typically in environments where we weren't allowed to feel. The book in itself is really well written, and it has both the science side of EQ as well, which I think is really beneficial, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not dense. It's not a hard read. And that book in itself, I think one of the most powerful books because I just like the title, right? The idea of that you do have the permission to feel, and it gets into what are all the benefits, both scientific and not, a lot of the things that we've been talking about.
I love that. That sounds great. There's a book that I also want to recommend. I think it's on what's it's got a long title, but it's I can't find it on my shelf right now, but it's called The Little Voice Inside Your Head. And then it's got an additional lengthier title to that, but I can't remember. By Mo Godot, I think is who it's by. And I'll put the link. I'll put all the links in the notes below. But it really also he worked in Google and was had an engineer, very technical mind, and then went through tragedy. His son had died, and he started working. It started creating this whole uh, project that he was helping other people with happiness. And then he wrote like another book before this one. But the book, well, I read most of it. I had a little bit left to read on it, but it has a lot of tools and in it and exercises. It really just gave me a whole different layer of insight. I feel like there's so many different like no matter where you are on the EQ journey, I feel like there's always just hearing another way someone shares something can be really
Mhm.
really impactful and insightful. So I'll put all the links to those books in the notes below. And then finally, how can people connect with you and work with you?
Um, I'd say the easiest path is just go to LinkedIn, and if you search for my name, which you can see right here in the bottom of my little square, just search for me on LinkedIn. I'm there. I really am active in terms of publishing a lot of helpful content that around this topic. Actually, I do have a quiz as well. So if you go to my profile on LinkedIn, there is a link there to take what's called my Emotional Intelligence Insights quiz,
Hmm.
which after you take it, interestingly enough, we can do a 30-minute sort of debrief of what your results are. So that's another way. You can obviously reach me through direct messaging through that platform as well. And then I am on Facebook and Instagram as well. And you can search for me there at 2 Steps Forward Coaching, is where you can find me.
Okay, great. I'll put the links down there too so people can find you easily. Well, Kevin, thanks again for coming on my channel today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. I hope all of you watching enjoyed this conversation, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.